There was a time when advanced education, beyond secondary school, and sometimes even including it, was regarded as a major priority for Canada. And I think we've lost that priority. I think provincial governments are experimenting. They just don't pay attention anymore.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Hello and welcome to the EdUp Canada podcast, where we explore the ideas and stories shaping education, politics, and policy in Canada. I'm your host, Michael Sangster, and today we have a truly special guest joining us. He's a distinguished leader whose work has spanned over 20 years in the House of Commons, cabinets with 3 different prime ministers, and who's had a transformative impact on both Canadian and global policy. I'm thrilled to welcome a mentor of mine and a good friend, Dr. Lloyd Axworthy.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good, Lloyd. Welcome. Good to see you again. And it's nice to know you're back living in Ottawa.
Well, we're here because we have grandchildren, and it's no better place than to be with family when you're sort of at this age and stage of things. So we're really enjoying it. Denise loves it, and we're just planning what kind of concerts we're going to take 9-year-old Charlotte to Christmas holidays.
Oh, these are fun things. There's 2 things I didn't think I'd see you back living in Ottawa, and you and I on a podcast together. I didn't ever see that happening. Let's talk a little bit about life. For those who don't know, Lloyd and I know each other very well. We actually did some work together in the Dominican Republic. I'm proud to say I knocked on doors for Lloyd in Winnipeg on more than a few occasions. And I was joking before we got on the air here that I've even sat on the floor of the Victoria Inn Hotel in Brandon, Manitoba, drinking scotch at 1 a.m. at a political convention while we watched what we could only call drunken young liberals walk back and forth in front of us. But I wanted to sit and talk to you about life and politics, not do the wandering around.
Well, Mike, I got to say that's very traditional, how to lubricate liberalism. That's a
lot of it's been done over scotches, right?
Yeah.
What drove you? There's nothing easy about life and politics. What drove you to keep going and put up with people like me to try and bring change?
Well, you begin, Mike, you have to add the 6 years in the provincial legislature, which is even tougher because I was the only liberal in the entire sort of assembly. So I owe a lot to family and friends, and particularly, I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, and which was a very interesting community. There was lots, you could play baseball at CUAC and attend sort of barbecues at other people's houses. So I got to love pierogies and holochis as my...
Oh.
Certainly a major factor was our family belonging to the United Church at the time, very much engaged with the idea of a social gospel. That was a movement that came out of the Protestant churches, and Winnipeg was the hotbed. Wesley College, which later became the University of Winnipeg, was the intellectual center. So basically, your commitments and your beliefs, making the world a better place for people, it really stuck very much as part of the values that I think I carried forward. And then I think that particular core root base was given direction when in high school, our history teacher, a wonderful guy named J.J. Phillips, said that our history class was required to go listen to a politician at the Civic Auditorium, to which we were all moaning and groaning, but eventually we did because we would lose our 25% of our term marks. And of course, the guy talking was Mike Pearson, who had just won the Nobel Prize. I have to say, Mike, that I came out of that session a different person. And I listened to him talk about what it meant to be a Canadian and how we had managed to reconcile differences and work in diversity and have respect for each other. Not easily. We had lots of bumps and grinds, but it also had a certain vocation in the world that we could do things that other countries couldn't do, and that And I think that all of a sudden it became that pathway opened up, working on in public life, in public service, and then particularly focusing on things like the way in which you make the world a little more secure, safe place for people.
It's an easy transition in your book, My Life in Politics, that talks about a lot of these things. But let me just focus on one. You had a clear view of Canada's place in the world, and you had that opportunity as Minister of Foreign Affairs to do things. Do you want to talk a little bit about that what you see as Canada's place in the world?
Well, I think that the basic foundations are there. I think we are still a country that's so privileged beyond belief. We're one of the richest, best developed, beautiful countries in the world that gives us a well-educated population. It allows us to have a democratic parliamentary system and an economy that provides equity and opportunity, not perfectly, but certainly along the way. And there aren't many other places in the world that have those kinds of privileges. The question is, how do you translate those into something that you try and share those privileges and those opportunities with other people? And I think that still is a role for Canada. It's just that we've kind of lost our direction on how to do it. And I think what turned the tide when I was in foreign affairs, we had a basic framework of ideas called human security, the protection of people, protection of innocent people. And that gave spawning to Canada taking the lead on a landmine treaty to ban landmines, setting up an international court, protecting child soldiers, working on reducing nuclear disarmament. And that became a sort of a strong Canadian cachet. I think what happened, 9/11 came along and the security took over the mantra. We all got sort of condition of terrorism. And then I think we have successive governments that lost their sense of purpose. I think under Mr. Harper, we no longer cared about the UN. We no longer participated multilaterally. We didn't use human security. So much of our foreign policy was dictated by domestic politics. And I think even when Joseph Trudeau came back and the Senate were back, we still kept cutting budgets and we didn't replace peacekeeping and we didn't take sort of a committed role around the world. And as a result, we kind of lost our place. We got defeated for Security Council seats at the UN, and less were people paying attention because we simply we weren't showing that we were interested in them.
Can't show up once a year at the UN, right?
Not only that, but you can't get on a stage and make speeches and then not deliver.
Not back it up. So one of the things that I always notice, because I grew up in Winnipeg, and I have to acknowledge that last week your Blue Bombers did beat my Saskatchewan Roughriders. I do have to mention that. It was a tough weekend.
Well, but look at Mike before you go on. How about those Jets? 14-1 opening season. Come on.
Nothing like it. I got my jersey on the wall over here. The Jets are looking really good. I managed to be a Jets fan, but I just could not cross over as a family from Saskatchewan. I couldn't cross over and wear the blue and gold though. Couldn't do that. So, but the thing I noticed about you in politics, and I had the fortune of being in a riding with you as my member of parliament, Jared Carstairs as my MLA, and you guys didn't always see eye to eye, but man, you both served the city and you served the province with pride. And I know there's a lot of respect between the two of you, but what I noticed was that you always made sure that Manitoba and Winnipeg were at the forefront. Even when you were on the international stage, that was important to you. Do you have a proudest moment of something you did for your hometown?
Let me say, I remember one point I was having dinner. I think we were with Madeleine Albright. We were both attending the UN, and we went out for dinner. We'd become quite good friends. And I said, "Look, I have to leave here by 9:00 to catch the last flight back to Canada." She said, "Well, why are you doing that?" I said, "Because I have to be in my constituency the next day." And she kind of looked at me and said, "Well, why do you have to be in your constituency?" Because I said, "Because if I'm not, I won't be a foreign minister very long." And I just learned that you begin at home. You have to be able because I have been involved in community organizing and when I was a student in the United States and civil rights movement, I had a strong respect for, I guess, what you call people power, politics of the street. And I think probably the demonstration of that was in the 1984 election when the Liberals, we were headed for sure defeat. And I could tell that, the tide was turning, but I survived. My plurality went down from about 5,000 to about 1,500, 2,000. But I survived as one of two liberals in Western Canada because I think people in the riding respected the fact that, I was there for them. And I will give you one example. It became the stuff of urban legend. But when I was a provincial MLA, one winter, every morning around 6 o'clock, I got a call from a woman who began to complain that she couldn't get out of her garage because the snowplows had pushed it up against the door. And I kind of politely responded that that really was a municipal matter and please call your alderman, whatever. The calls kept coming until finally, after about a week of this, I got up, took my shovel, shoveled out her snow, and all of a sudden, in that particular part of the riding on River Avenue, I have to say I got 70% of the vote from that time onwards. People have said if the guy can shovel snow at 6 in the morning, what can't he do?
It reminds me of the story of the gentleman in Saskatchewan who ran the billboard campaign to get rid of Ralph Goodale.
Yeah.
And on election night, when the Trudeau government was elected, the second Trudeau government was elected, he was being interviewed on television that night because they managed to defeat Ralph Goodale. And he actually himself stated, maybe this wasn't such a great idea. Saskatchewan doesn't have someone at the table anymore.
That's right. That's right.
It's important to have somebody at the table, isn't it?
It's important, but part of the problem, Mike, we're kind of delving into contemporary things, but increasingly the federal government pays less and less attention. Revisions to the Constitution, the Liberal Party, which took away every single power for review of leadership, took away all the accountabilities, and there was made sure that the Prime Minister's office could dictate who the candidates were. The constituency had very little control. So we kind of lost those grassroots. And I think we're paying a price for it right now in terms of the turmoil over the leadership of Mr. Trudeau. We don't have any corridor or rules by which to do it. I mean, it's hurting the party deeply because what was a clear set of protocols and arrangements don't exist. And so people have to hide behind the curtain and organize cabals and things. And it just it's not good for the politics. And I think it also reflects itself in the lack of real commitments. As we well know, the Liberal Party is really sort of on life support in Western Canada. And that's simply because over the years, election campaign managers thought that they could become a government in Ontario and Quebec, and they didn't need the Western. And I was always kind of caught in that backfire. But it's certainly the kind of divides that are taking place in the country are a product, I think, of that lack of representation.
I think the greatest compliment I could give you is that I know a lot of conservatives in Winnipeg who respected you and Manitoba respected you, but you always ran on ideas. You had things that you believed we needed to get done, whether it was the Port of Churchill or different issues over your time that were important to you. But as the shortest serving member of your staff, because I believe I left the day before I started, because of some political things that were going on around leadership, but you've got a loyal army of staffers that really put their backs into it for you, didn't they? I know you talk about it a little bit.
Michael, they still exist. I mean, we have a roundtable every 3 or 4 months where former staffers get. And actually, going back to the question about the book, I think one of the sort of encouragements back in COVID days, we were in one of those sort of what we call the old gang sort of symposia where people who are now scattered in different parts of the world, all of them had gone on to become deputy ministers or ambassadors, or all of them had sort of succeeded in acquiring some real traction themselves. And in the course of it, I started musing that I thought maybe I had been reading some other people's memoirs, like Madeleine Albright's and Monique Bejean and other. And they said, well, why did you do yours? Because you've had 40, 50 years in public life. You've done some interesting things, and Canadians should know about it. And it was an encouragement of my staff, not only just their encouragement, but they also promised that they would begin to share all their secrets they had held from me all the years that we were in government. I was able to flesh out the book with a lot of interesting insights that I got from talking to people who worked together.
That'd be a good bottle of scotch discussion, some of those stories at some point, I'm sure. We've relished back to Winnipeg. Let me go back there one more time. Let's talk about your time at the University of Winnipeg. You transformed that institution. I remember coming there to speak one day with General Rick Hillier when I was with TELUS, and we were talking about a new program we did with the university. And I said at the time, I feel for the person that follows you because you've lit this thing on fire, and there's going to be a lot of funding requirements to keep all this going. Talk about your time at the university and what it meant to you.
Well, I guess I came at it with a pretty interesting legacy. I'd been a student, I had been a professor, I had headed up an institute, and I was a loyal alum. And the university in the early part of the 2000s had run into some trouble. The Board of Regents and the sitting president, Connie Rook, had real differences of opinion. She was forced to leave. So the university was without much direction. It had a lot of sort of internal arguments going on. And so they approached me if I would come. And I said, well, I'm getting a little old to do beauty contests, so I'm not going to go through the rigmarole of having to dance on the stage for 3 months. But they got back and they said, look, would you come and have dinner with us? And I said, sure. And I had dinner, and about 3 weeks later, the board asked me to become the president and vice chancellor. I was honored because, it's nothing like going back to your old institution. But by that time, I had acquired a lot of experience in government. I had run some of the biggest departments and ministries in the country. I knew about organizing. I knew how to take initiatives, make changes. The first thing I did when I got there is, along with sort of Jennifer Radley, who was a CBC broadcaster, joined my staff, and we knocked on doors and around the university and discovered that the community around the U of W were not very happy with it. They felt isolated and detached. Particularly, they were mad because the Duckworth Center, the athletic center, which there had been a promise that they would share, and had become a closed door. So it brought home very much that the university is a downtown inner city university, had real responsibilities to the community. And it was also facing a huge financial crunch. When I got there, the science labs were under investigation for escaping fumes. There was virtually no student housing. Classroom space was at a premium, and we couldn't recruit increasingly skilled faculty members. And here's something that is, I want to use this opportunity because at the time the university had founded a separate foundation that Sandy Wiley was chair and Susan was the president. We sat down, they gave me a prospectus to show that there hadn't been any serious fundraising in about 15 years. So with the support of that kind of business community, who weren't asking for any special privileges, they simply said, it's important to have a good university downtown. We raised $150 million. We did some major reconstruction in the university. We closed off Spence Street so that the kids weren't having to jump through 4 lanes of traffic to cut across the campus. Built a new science building, a new sort of a business center. We expanded into a new programming. But most importantly, we said that we had a commitment to opening up the university for the education of inner city kids, many of whom were Indigenous kids because that was a large majority of people in the inner city. And that became sort of the hallmark for my 10 years, that we tried different programs, and I think we innovated. We found some interesting ways to open up the doors, to provide financial support. We have what we call the Opportunity Fund, where any student that wanted to come could apply in August, and in 3 weeks have $3,000 or $4,000 to get them into the door. We established a summer camp program for inner city kids so that we worked with children in the junior high schools and in science and math. And as a result, I think we established a clear sort of pioneering of a lot of ways in which education really fulfills its commitment to be an upwardly mobile ladder and give people new opportunities. And as I say in the book, it was one of the proud moments of my life when just after I announced my retirement, the Indigenous community, urban community, sort of made me a spiritual pipe carrier for the work I did on enabling Indigenous education. One of those honors that I cherish.
Well, and you helped transform that. That is quite an honor. You helped transform the downtown again, add some life, add some energy. You just have to walk around that area. When my daughter was dancing with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, she went to the high school program there, and it was a great institution for her. But down the block, we've got Herzing College, one of our members that I work with, a career college. And I noticed your comment about uplifting, because there are many different channels for people to get uplifted. Some it's university, some it's community college, some it's a career college. Let's talk about international students. I don't know the situation at the University of Winnipeg when you were there.
One of the things that we did work on at the university is partnerships with the community colleges. We said that there is a great demand for people who have both skill sets intellectually or academically, and skill sets in craft and in making things work. And so we developed a joint program with Red River College. We developed joint programs with the Institute of Technology. So we really worked with the colleges, because I felt that education is not a series of silos. And it really is a sort of a continuum of different opportunities. And to me, it was great if somebody could come to the university for a year or two and learn about their English grammar and the history of Canada, and then go out and be able to properly become a good mechanic or carpenter or technologist. And so I think we've allowed our systems to become a little bit too sort of, again, divided.
You know, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I often talk about the Newfoundland example of the career colleges, the community college, and the universities all work really well together. And students ladder up and down, and we need to get more of that, because people are headed towards different institutions for different reasons. In the career college sector, a lot of our students are 60% female, mid-30s. They're at a different point in their life. They don't want to come in and take a 4-year program. They want to take 6 months, 8 months, get back to work. And they also enjoy that smaller class size where they're not used to an educational environment. They're not used to taking exams. So a smaller class size, a little bit more intimate, but let's accept those skills and training and ladder them up into a community college, into a university, and make sure we're actually training the workers we need, which segues into a topic I did want to talk about, which is this recent international student. Although in our institutions, we last year, using the IRCC data, we had about 4% of the international students in career colleges. But we became the boogeyman. We became the bad actors, and I still haven't figured out exactly how we became such bad actors when there's an institution in Ontario that took in more new international students, a community college, than our sector. One institution took in more than our sector took in Canada. Do you have any thoughts from your cabinet experience, your university experience, on the way the government's handled this situation?
Like, you remember, one of my portfolios for close to 4 years is immigration minister. And I remember having lunch with Ron Atkey, who had been the immigration minister under Joe Clark. And I talk about this, or I write about this in the book. He said, it's a sacred trust. You're not only defend the rights of opportunities for people to come, but also make sure that the system is properly managed, and that Canadians can have trust and confidence that it's going to work and not be overwhelmed. So here's, to me, is one of the mistakes. We began to use immigration as a way to solve other problems. And what happened, provinces in particular started cutting back on their funding and freezing tuitions and putting all kinds of guardrails on revenue and on opportunities. The federal government, rather than coming to the table, said, well, what we can do is we can open up the international student program and let it kind of become wide open, and didn't invest, as they should have, in the adjustment that goes with it: housing, services, things of that kind. They just became sort of an easy way to help fund higher education and college education. Once that became sort of a political sort of hot potato, they're now sort of getting into these sort of massive sort of retrenchments. Two things are happening. One, we're putting a lot of our institutions at risk fiscally. And number two, we're losing our reputation internationally as being a good place for your people from different parts of the world to come and get an education.
That's being lost in the debate, that second one. And my members don't face that because we don't get government funding. We don't face that financial crunch as much as I feel for the colleges and universities. They've had freezes, they've had caps, prices of everything else has gone up. They haven't been able to raise wages or raise admission fees. So they've took the path that was open to them, which was international students.
That's right.
But the damage to our international brand is extreme.
There was a time when advanced education, beyond secondary school, and sometimes even including it, was regarded as a major priority for Canada. And I think we've lost that priority. I think provincial governments are experimenting. They just don't pay attention anymore. And I don't know that's because of the kind of people they elect or that there's fatigue or whatever. But as a result, we reflected in the rules and the standards and everything else. There's just not a lot of attention being paid.
The interesting stat that I use quite often is from Statistics Canada is that we've gone from 7 workers for every retiree, and by 2030, we're going to be 2 workers for every retiree. So immigration and education is important too. Accepting foreign credentials, there's a lot of work that does need to get done.
And I think that's what immigration should be working on. They got wrapped themselves into temporary workers programs in order to make sure that there would be entry-level workers coming into the sort of retail industries and agriculture. And that's a good program. But again, all the wraps were taken off. There was no serious sort of corridor pathway in which both not just the numbers, but also the where and who and how were answered. And that if you're going to invite people to come to your country and become citizens and become workers and help out, then you have to make sure that they have proper settlement when they get here. That's been a missing component because, look, we have a federal system that divides immigration from housing and education, and we don't have a lot of cooperation in those areas these days.
I agree. We have a housing shortage, and we're trying to, at our association, trying to get more immigration into workers and train them to build houses because that's what we need. We're in a bit of a catch-22. But I got one big question to ask at the end I think people will be interested in. But 2 things we ask every guest. And one's kind of maybe just a couple of quick answers here on a mentor in your life. Because you mentored a lot of us, even though you probably didn't realize we were doing it. Although I have seen you put ice in your scotch, which would make my grandfather upset. I don't know if you do it all the time, but on occasion you do. So that mentoring might not have been spot on. But a mentor in your life that changed your life and a skill that you think that's made you successful, and whether you developed it during life or it's just something you naturally had.
Oh, no, I think politics is a craft. It's not something that is embedded by some divine right. You have to work at learning it and you participating in it. Part of our problem is so many people come into politics, thinking that, well, after they've had a great career owning a hardware store, then now I can go on and change the country. Well, some have that capacity, but many people, it takes a while to learn how the system works, how to have purpose and pragmatism at the same time, how to have a set of goals, but also understand how you achieve them and how you mobilize support and how you get public engagement and buy-in, how you work with your colleagues in cabinet. And so those are all sort of skills.
Collaboration. You think it's probably the skill that you were good at?
And listening. I mean, one of the things that I always felt, you recall from the times I was in government, I would have major discussions with NGO groups, with educational groups, with others, because I found that they oftentimes knew a hell of a lot more than I did. And I had to learn from them. And I think that right now we're far too much top down with already imbibed sense of divinity about where we're going, as opposed to learning from the grassroots up.
Do you have a mentor? I'm sitting here thinking about, it's funny, every time we've done this question, I think of somebody new, and it's the context of the person I'm talking to. I'm thinking about Senator Mulgat today for some reason, as just a gentleman in the room. But do you have a mentor that was in your career?
Well, of course, he was the sort of touchstone of our provincial party for years, and then when he became leader of the Senate, I mean, he provided a model. But Gil Mulgat, I mean, there were times he would get very frustrated with me because I was part of a ginger group, but that was okay. But that was the joy of being, at that time, being a Liberal, is that you would be part of the same party. You would have differences of opinion. You would kind of negotiate and trade and bargain. But at the end, you were serving the same purpose. You were in the same family. And right now, we have too many internal sort of take no prisoners approach, and that as a result, we don't have that kind of working cooperative arrangements. It's been interesting the last years, and being in Ottawa, I've been on a couple of platforms with Joe Clark, and people say, "How is it that you two guys get along? Going back, you seem to work together as we did on both when we were both in governments or in opposition." And that doesn't work much anymore. But we said because we respect anybody who becomes a member of parliament needs to be respected, and then you also respect people from other parties because son of a gun, sometimes they have a good idea.
Yeah, I remember when I first came to Parliament Hill, there was a lot more sitting around the rooms with the other sides, having conversations, having a glass of wine and conversations. We need to get back there, and we need good people like that because it is important. It's always fun if you're walking around the market. You can run into Joe Clark. I had a coffee with him one day, sat down, and just talked. A wonderful gentleman, a wonderful gentleman. So I have one topic I want to touch on before we end because we can't not. We're just a couple of weeks after something happened down in the U.S., and you've got a unique perspective on Canada-U.S. relations. You were there, free trade, other issues. What are you thinking about the new government in the U.S.? Is a resounding victory for him. The one good thing for me that came out of it is somebody got a mandate. We're not going to debate for 2 months. Who won? He won. Now what do we do with it?
Well, I think we're kind of going through kind of a collective group therapy right now about how to adjust. Here's my concern, Michael. I understand the need of government spokespersons to say, look at too agitated. We worked with the Trump government before. We'll do it again. I don't think it's like it was before. They're coming in with a very different agenda, very different modus operandi. Just look at the kind of people he's now appointing to senior posts. So hard-nosed, right-wing, protectionist, anti-internationalist along the way. And I think that while we have to fairly find the ways of getting along with a neighbor, let's not kid ourselves that somehow buttering up Donald Trump and some of his allies is going to make a difference. He's going to do exactly what he wants to do. So far, we've said we want to be cooperative. Well, that's fine. But at the same time, I think it behooves our political leadership to stand up and say, but Canada is still going to stand for the values we think are important. Rules of law, human rights, protection of people. You're facing a government that wants to sort of pull away from Ukraine, that wants to abandon commitments on climate change, that is going to impose major terrorism. And I think we need to stand up and say, wait a minute, that we don't agree with that. And we have to find new channels. We have to work not just with the Europeans. We have to start developing much better connections in the southern part of the globe and say that this kind of rule of autocrats and oligarchs and high-tech billionaires is not democracy. It's autocracy. And I think as Canadians, we have to stand up and say so. And I'm a little concerned that we're just spending a little bit too much backwards or over to make sure that message is heard.
I can't agree more. I'm getting a little tired of saying the phrase, "May we live in interesting times." I'd like to have a little bit of dullness for a while.
Yeah, right. Well,
which kind of reminds me of the first couple of years of the Chrétien government. We needed quiet, good government, and that's pretty much what it was for the first. I think the first term was, we're just going to govern well.
Yeah, and we did. Although I sort of spent 2.5 years as the human resources minister, and it wasn't quiet for me. I had to reform the unemployment insurance system. So,
you had some interesting portfolios during your time for sure, but I know that wasn't the most pleasant one for you.
No, it was a tough one.
And you held some interesting ones during the original Trudeau government as well. So I'm going to finish up the podcast this week by saying something I don't often say, but it's just thank you. Public service is public service. And I wish we had a respect more in the country for the people who put their names on a ballot and go forward. You didn't get rich in the government. You spent a lot of time on airplanes, and there's nothing easy about going back and forth to Winnipeg from Ottawa, snowstorms, long delays, sitting in uncomfortable airport chairs. I often tell the story of a gentleman named Rob Merrifield, who you might remember, but he's from Jasper. And I saw him one Monday morning for a meeting, and he was exhausted. And I realized that he'd flown home Thursday night to Edmonton, then drove 6 hours to get to his riding, spent the whole weekend driving around a huge riding to then drive back Sunday night and take a flight to Ottawa overnight.
One of the reasons for writing this book is to impart the message to a generation that is now, taking over the governing and the management of this country. The government counts, politics count. It's an important calling, and we need more good people. And for young men and women, it's tough, but it's also rewarding. And I hope that my career can be a little bit of a model for those that say, you have a wonderful run, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I was given.
Well, I appreciate that, Lloyd. I appreciate your time today for joining us. But when this airs next week, we will know if your Bombers have beat the Argos. And we'll know if they've retained that Grey Cup championship that I'll have to hear about for the rest of the year from everybody from Winnipeg. But thank you for your time today, and thank you for your time in politics. And with that, we'll end this edition of the EdUp Canada podcast, and we look forward to being back with you all next week. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.